Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Break the Isolation. My name is Robert Dugdale. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at AMEB, and I'm thrilled to be hosting today's webinar, Musical Theatre in a Changing World, featuring George Torbay. For those joining us for the first time today, the Break the Isolation webinar series aims to bring together community, keep us connected, and share creative ideas during this time. You can get involved by asking questions or sharing your ideas with other participants via our live chat function at the bottom of your screen. And we'll have some time for your questions toward the end of today's webinar. I'm joined today by George Torbay, a distinguished conductor, music educator, singing teacher, adjudicator, performer, and director. George was the syllabus advisor for AMEB's musical theatre syllabus, which was released in 2015, and continues to serve as the New South Wales Chief Examiner, Musical Theatre, and an examiner in South Australia. He's a graduate of the New England Conservatory in Boston and the University of Sydney and the Queensland Conservatorium of Music. From 1997 until 2008, he was the chief conductor for the New South Wales Department of Education and Training and the artistic director of the Sydney Opera House concert series. George was the director of music and judge on Channel 7's Battle of the Choirs and has worked on Sunrise. He's also conducted and recorded the national anthem for the closing ceremony of the Olympics with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. George has numerous international appointments, but is currently the head of music theatre at the Elder Conservatorium of Music as part of the University of Adelaide. George, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. It's good to be with you. Hello, everyone.
I can hear they all said hello.
Good.
Oh, sure. Of course, this webinar series was created to provide support and inspiration to those finding themselves at home as a result of the pandemic. So it makes sense that our conversation starts there. We know that online learning has worked really well for academic subjects, and teachers across the world have been able to find success in delivering their online classes. However, musical theatre is uniquely collaborative, and I imagine migrating to the online world has been particularly challenging. So I thought perhaps you could start by sharing with us some of the ways you've been able to maintain your coursework, the rehearsals and the tuition with your students throughout the pandemic, both at a tertiary level, but also at a private teaching level.
Yeah, well, firstly, it's great to be with everybody today, and I hope that I can share some of the things that we've been doing that have been successful and have worked. This has been, without a doubt, the most challenging period of my professional life and has certainly pushed us to be more creative than we've ever been. And I think that's probably one of the key things that about how we've endured the last couple of months. And that is that I met with my staff way back in March at the beginning of all of this. And the first thing I said to them was, absolutely no idea is stupid. And, be as creative as you possibly can. I've been blessed that I've got a fantastic staff, all who are functioning professional musicians, theatre directors, actors, dancers, all working in the industry. And so we really just came together to create the best possible program with the best possible resources that we had at hand. And we literally decided that we would throw out the rule book and come up with whatever we thought would be as engaging for the students that we could possibly make it. Our fear right at the beginning, and this was something that I shared with them, was that online learning can, to make up for the fact that you're online, sometimes educators will swamp the students with a lot of material. So we were very conscious of making sure that we weren't trying in a way to make up for the fact that we weren't in face-to-face teaching and swamp the students with so much material and so much interaction that it becomes overwhelming. So we tried to make it seem like a class, in that you go to the class, you do some pre-work, you do some work after the class, and some of your own study, but this idea that we needed you to be constantly online and constantly interacting was something that I didn't want, because I think that that is overwhelming, and certainly my students conveyed that to me as a positive for what we've done, that it hasn't swamped their lives. And so I think that that's really important. And of course, some courses, as you already mentioned, some courses translate over to the online platform really easily. Musicianship, music theatre history, which I teach, moved over into the online platform very easily. Acting and voice, we used Zoom. We're currently using Zoom for those sessions because all the lecturers wanted some interaction. Yeah, there's some issues with time and delay and things like that, but essentially we wanted that level of interaction for them to look at each other and for the lecturer to see the student and see how they're coping and managing, and we thought that that was really important. They do use My Uni, which is our online learning platform for things like file sharing and reading and quizzes and group discussions and forums and things like that. But they're still running classes in that Zoom, using Zoom, which has been really useful, because also those sessions have been recorded, so a student can go back and review the material and things like that. I also teach song repertoire, and for that I've been using a program which I didn't know before the pandemic, but I've become quite familiar with now, and that's a program called Padlet. And this is a tremendous site where you can share files. So for example, I can post whatever I want onto there, but a student can upload a file, and then I can review that performance. The students can share their own thoughts about the performance, and I can set whatever task I want. I was going to share the screenshot of Padlet so you could have a look at what it looked like. Of course, all my students are on there, so I don't want to do that. But I encourage you to get on and have a look.
On the web, but they might be watching.
But it's tremendous, and the sound quality is actually fantastic. I'm getting to hear my students and see their work, and I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things and strategies I use to make sure that we maximise hearing and seeing the students. The biggest problem we had was dance, and that was really challenging. I'm fortunate that I have a great network of other heads of music theatre from around Australia and overseas that I communicate with and share with regularly. And this is a really fantastic bunch of people, and we share ideas. Nothing, nothing is secretive. We really want to share everything and help each other as much as we possibly can. All of us got together and shared our frustrations and challenges where dance was concerned. The way that we did it, and it was slightly different to everybody else, but the way that we did it with my dance staff, we devised, rather than running a class, we broke it up into smaller skills-based training. And so smaller activities that could be filmed from different angles, uploaded, and then a student could complete those tasks, film themselves doing them, and return. We did include some group work in there where they could collaborate with others. A lot of my students live together in shared housing and things like that, so that made that doable.
Good.
And that's worked reasonably well. I'm not going to say to you that it's this new thing that we've found and discovered, and it's this whole new way of teaching. Dance and acting and song repertoire and voice work, you need to be in the room. You need to be interacting with each other and doing what is the primary job of any actor, which is listen first and be in the space and react in real time to whatever you're being offered. Is it ideal? No, it's not ideal, but we have made the most of it, and our students have not just thrived, they've really flourished. And they've done incredibly well. The other problem that we've had are productions, which of course we haven't been able to do. So we've done group work online, where the students will record their own part, and then we've mixed that together, and using a lot of song cycles from music theatre and things like that. It's worked really well, and the students have found that actually very beneficial. We actually don't normally get to cover a lot of that material in regular class time, so it's actually been quite useful to be able to cover some of that really beautiful repertoire this way. And I'm looking at other ways that we can put on a production without necessarily being in the room together. That is really challenging, but I'm suddenly at the moment exploring other ways that I can do that. The challenge is rights and getting permission to be able to do the sort of things that we want to do, because this is all a brand new area, but we're certainly managing that.
Right. Well, that's a great segue to my next question, actually. But we have shared a link to Padlet, which people can check out in the chat function below.
Yeah, it's great.
And if you are one of George's students watching, feel free to ask a question. We might even be able to get to it at some point as well. It'd be good to hear from everybody. But yeah, a great segue to my next question, which is really about the fact that musical theatre is evolutionary and is often written to reflect the times. And so I wonder whether musical theatre will change as a result of the current global environment, and how do you see it changing? And that, I guess, for composers, what they're writing, directors, what they're directing, and performers, how they might go about expressing and creating characters as a result of this.
Well, musical theatre is no different to every other art form in that we react to whatever's happening outside. And our art is a reflection of what we're living through and what we think and what we're going through and experiencing. So musical theatre, if you look at the last 100 years of musical theatre work, you can absolutely see and pinpoint key historical things that were happening outside and had a direct impact inside the theatre. So I don't see this time being any different from that. It's unique, certainly, and nothing that any of us have lived through, but music theatre is always changing. So regardless of the pandemic, it's a reflection of our lives and what's happening in the world and what's important to us right now. So I don't think that that's anything different. I think the biggest change might be in quantity on stage and in the theatre. Fewer people doing it and fewer people viewing it in real time or in the space. I was just talking to somebody recently from the Fringe Festival, and here in Adelaide we have a vibrant Fringe, and they were saying that they're really looking at, maybe having much smaller performances, of course, but far and maybe shorter, but more regular. And so a lot of people can come and go and see the performance, but you're sharing it with just a small group of people and maybe a smaller amount of performers. That's certainly challenging financially and all of those things, but like everything else, we will adapt to whatever situation we have. And the other thing I would say is that I don't see this, I know a lot of people have been saying will be different forever. I don't see this as forever. Those changes might weave their way into what we do. But society has learned to live with other pandemics where there hasn't been a vaccine, and we may not have a vaccine. So the issue is, how do we live with this rather than everything suddenly going to change and be different? I think this will become part of what we do, and it might change the way we do in some small ways, but theatre will go on and theatre will come back, and it will be a part of our lives. We may interact with it differently, but that's really the only big change.
Yeah, and we've actually received a question wondering, do you know of anyone who is writing a theatre production based on the last few months of the pandemic?
No, I don't. Might make for some rousing big numbers. No, I don't.
Or lots of solos, perhaps.
Yeah, there's lots of solos.
Doing it on Zoom, perhaps.
Yeah.
Coming back to teaching, do you have any helpful tips or advice that teachers might find useful for online lessons, especially those teachers who might not see themselves as musical theatre specialists, but have found themselves teaching repertoire to their students?
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole essence, what I do with my students, the whole essence of music theatre is about um, uh, you. You're the most important ingredient in musical theatre, and you bringing yourself to a piece. We're not interested, certainly at the Elder Conservatorium, I'm not interested in the students just simply duplicating the performance of somebody else or replicating what somebody else has done successfully for them. I want them to begin with themselves and then to look at the material and to ingest that material and what that means for them and how it comes alive for them, what interesting take they have on it. So I would say to the staff out there who are working with students is the first thing is, you know, get them to stop acting and stop performing and all that sort of stuff and tell you a good story. That's really the most important thing, and what we do with our students, that the essence of storytelling, and certainly what I tried to instill in the AMEB syllabus is that essence of storytelling is by far the most important ingredient in any musical theatre performance. That's where you start. In terms of tips for working in a Zoom platform, individual lessons and that kind of thing, there's a couple of things that I'm sure are not new and revolutionary, but that I'd encourage the people watching to think about, and that is, you know, sound quality is certainly always an issue. It's actually less of an issue for vocalists, probably more of an issue for instrumentalists, but I find it less of an issue for vocalists. Everything that my students are recording, I can hear easily, and vocal quality isn't diminished. You may lose some of the natural, the natural ambience in a voice, but essentially it still works incredibly well. I know there's FaceTime and there's Skype and those kinds of things. We tend to use Zoom because I think it gives the best results. You can share your screen, you can have multiple students, you can have shareable links, you can mute them if it's really bad. You can save yourself a lot of time by making sure that, you know, you both have the same material. So if I'm looking at something, I want to make sure that my student is looking at the same thing, but that's also where I can share a screen. I've been running musical theatre history through Zoom, and I have actually found it incredibly useful because I've been able to mention something and then very quickly share that video or share that link straight away with the students, which is really fantastic. But if you're not sharing the screen, then just making sure that you're both looking at the same hymnal is a really good idea. And the other thing that I would say to the studio teachers out there is, aside from making sure that the lighting is great in the room so that you can really see, I'd encourage you to make sure that you're viewing the candidate, the student, from different angles in every lesson, not always in exactly the same place, but getting them to set the camera or the phone or wherever from a slightly different angle, which certainly for a singer would give you a better view of what's going on and more of a holistic view. And the last thing is, I like to see the entire body of my student. Music theatre, I want to make sure that the entire body is engaged and relaxed and open and free, you know, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, brilliant. You were the advisor for AMEB's musical theatre syllabus, which was released in 2015. And we've talked a little bit about the evolution of musical theatre. And I guess the AMEB musical theatre syllabus has evolved as well, because a number of new pieces were introduced last year. I thought while you're here, perhaps you could talk briefly about these pieces, why they were introduced, and why it's important for students and teachers to explore new repertoire regularly.
Well, there's nothing more important than encouraging my students to sing the stories of now and the composers of now. It's absolutely crucial that they're telling those stories that are relevant for them and alive for them right now. Of course, I want my students to study history, and our course at the Elder Con is structured that way. First semester, students focus entirely on repertoire from the 20s and 30s, and in second semester, they do the Golden Age book musicals up to about 1964. And first semester of second year, they look at late 60s, 70s, early 80s, And so the semesters are structured that way right up to the present day, so that they have a global and holistic view of how musical theatre has changed and progressed, and we align that with history, so that they know that, you know, during the Great Depression this was happening in the theatre for all of these reasons, and so that they understand that. But for the AMEB syllabus, I really want students to be singing the music that's relevant to them right now. And I think that, you know, I say this carefully because I know how challenging it is to add repertoire to a syllabus, but I think that that process of keeping the syllabus current and relevant is terribly important, and it shouldn't just happen in the musical theatre syllabus. And I've asked them if I can do this sort of once every 2 or 3 years, add songs to the syllabus, because music theatre is that current, and a whole batch of new material has just been written in the last 12 months. And that's the material that gets students engaged in music theatre, that gets them excited about it. And of course I want them to be singing that, because that's their way into the art form, and I want them to be excited. But I added about 45 songs to the syllabus last year, and they came from sort of all the current shows: Dear Evan Hansen, Waitress, Hamilton, Come From Away, Bright Star, Anastasia, Moana, Frozen, Fun Home, The Band's Visit, Heathers, School of Rock, In Transit, a whole bunch of new shows that I thought the students would, and Hamilton. Did I say Hamilton? New shows that the students would find relevant and interesting and exciting, and their way into the art form. I want that always.
Yeah, fantastic. And look, we're getting, I think, well, it is possible, perhaps, and I've seen in the chat group, someone's mentioned the words coronavirus, the musical. So perhaps in the next round of new repertoire for the syllabus, you'll be adding some current repertoire inspired by the pandemic, perhaps, or perhaps
possibly.
Not.
Possibly. I shan't hold my breath, but possibly.
Before we take some questions, I wanted to ask you briefly about those involved in the professional business of musical theatre. So we respect that the pandemic has been a tremendously challenging time for artists and performers everywhere. However, we've seen some amazing online innovations, and for many people, it's been music that's helped them to break the isolation. So could you provide a little insight into how the global musical theatre has coped, and how you think it might recover and be able to return to normal again? When will we go to the theatre again?
I was speaking with a good friend of mine who, a husband and wife team, who run the American Shakespeare Theatre in Virginia. And they were hit quite hard by the pandemic and shut down, of course. And very quickly, they created a whole new online platform for delivering Shakespeare. It started off with some readings, and then they transitioned over into staged performances where the cameras were on stage with them, and so that, you know, you could get up close and personal watching the actors work. And those have been incredibly successful and have really gained for them a brand new audience and a much wider reach than they normally have had. Again, I want to say that no one's going to tell you that this is ideal, but this is surviving. And there was an interesting quote that I read in a newspaper a few weeks ago that said, "What does a theatre company do when it can't do what it was created for? Anything it can think of." And I think that that's really the essence of what certainly I know my friends in the industry have been doing, theatre companies, opera companies, musical theatre companies, and that is anything it can think of in order to try and provide some work and some avenue for, you know, the average listener to be watching and participating in. And, you know, theatre companies, opera companies everywhere have been streaming old performances, and that's great. And I've been giving those to my students so that they get to see some amazing productions. You know, a chance to really experience them is absolutely fantastic. But, you know, you mentioned, you know, will theatre go back to normal? Well, there is no normal. That's the thing. There is what we've had before. But as I said to you, before, theatre's always changing, and we are a reflection of what's happening on the outside. So theatre will be slightly different moving forward, but it will come back, and it will be similar in many ways. But we will take these changes and make them a part of us, and move on. And if you look at history, Showboat premiered in 1927, and it was heralded as the big thing, and it was going to change theatre forever. And 2 years later was the crash of Wall Street, and then the Great Depression. In the 30s saw a real departure. Theatre changed dramatically during the 30s. Nobody wanted, a show that was deep and meaningful and depressing. They wanted light entertainment. They wanted to escape into the theatre and forget that outside people didn't have jobs and they were starving and all that sort of stuff. And, that's why Anything Goes in 1934 was so successful, because it was escapist. It was a chance to go into the theatre and see something which was totally different from the outside and was just life and fun and joy. But people also forget that 1 year later, 1935, we got Porgy and Bess. So out of this incredible darkness comes, enormous creativity and growth, and people can be extraordinarily creative. And I imagine that the future will be exactly that.
Yeah. I guess we've seen so much creativity online, people offering their repertoire and their skills and talent.
Yeah.
And sharing what they can in a way they can during this time.
Yeah.
So that's brilliant. You mentioned Hamilton twice.
Yeah.
Is it still coming next year?
As far as I know, I signed up to get early tickets. So as far as I know, I think September or something of next year. Yeah, it's still planned to happen, and that's really exciting. I saw it in New York. I was in New York in January, and I saw it there, and it was what you would imagine. It was one of the most exciting nights in the theatre. I've never seen choreography like that, and I've never seen direction like that. So it was terribly exciting. I'm definitely going to see it again.
Fantastic. There are a few questions, not in any particular order. Your favourite musical of all time?
That's such a hard question because there's too many. I can give you a few of my faves.
A few faves.
But it changes, periodically. So, but look, I always come back to Sweeney Todd, and I always come back to Into the Woods, because they're sort of two hardcore favourites, and I adore, and I never get sick of those pieces. But, I've been listening to Hamilton and Dear Evan Hansen and Waitress for the last few months, and sort of devouring those scores. But I also force myself to listen to things that I know I'm going to hate. But for the sake of my job and working with my students, I want to make sure that I know the music that they love, even though I might not necessarily like it. And so, for example, Heathers, the musical, which I hate, I forced myself to listen to that over and over again to get familiar with the score. So, even Legally Blonde I didn't like, but I spent 2 weeks listening to Legally Blonde pretty much non-stop.
Oh, really?
And I appreciate it. Let's just say that.
Respect. Have you had any students who you have found just haven't coped very well through this period? And what have you done to help them, and how have they adapted?
Yeah, I have to say that the whole mental health area has been an aspect of the pandemic which hasn't had a lot of people talk about. It's been significant for us, and I feel like I've spent far more of my time dealing with mental health issues and the challenges. I've got students who are far away from their families and didn't leave, and some did return home just before the borders closed, but some stayed here. And so they're far away from their families, they're young and financially struggling. So this is, and then they've got all the online stuff that they're doing with me. They're frustrated. They're dancing in a space that's, 2 meters by 2 meters at home. And it's not conducive to that kind of work. But I feel like I've spent far more of my time dealing with those kinds of issues. We have a terrific network at the university to cater for those and look after those students. But more internally, the music theatre department is very much a family. Everybody knows everybody. We're all sort of invested in each other's lives. So we are constantly reaching out to each other and making sure that everybody has somebody to talk to, and they're connecting with people, and that's been the most important thing. And when things have been bleak, that's usually an opportunity for me to throw in an activity that allows us to look at each other for a bit and make some music together. Regardless of the quality, that's sort of almost irrelevant. But, an opportunity for connection. So, yeah, it's been incredibly challenging. And I dare say, even after the borders have opened and everything's been relaxed, we'll still be dealing with some of these issues. But it's been significant.
That's brilliant. We have time for one more question. It's a question relating to new musical theatre courses. You're noted for being someone who is a creator, a raiser of new musical theatre courses, both in Australia and abroad. And we're wondering what encouragement you might have for potential candidates of the musical theatre course at the Elder Conservatorium. Why come to Adelaide? What's different about the course you're running there? And how will the candidates, what will they learn that they might not learn somewhere else? And what employment opportunities might arrive from what they'll study as part of the course?
Well, certainly during the audition process, we have a fairly detailed Q&A at the end of that process where I encourage the students, after they've been through the callback process, to ask any question that they want. I make a commitment that I will never lie to them, and I really try my hardest to never try to inflate what I think the course is. I try to tell them honestly what the course is. I'm very good friends with the people at WAPA and VCA and Griffith, and I think they all do terrific work, and I'm a great admirer of the work that they do. So I'll never say to a student, we at the Elder Conservatorium do this. But there are some unique things about the things that we do, but they're just different. Other courses will find different ways to do them. But the thing that matters to me, having worked as a professional and being in the industry, is that I try to make sure that my students have access to as many opportunities as we possibly can. So, for example, I can't make my students an expert in every possible area of music theatre. Music theatre is a huge umbrella now of many, many styles and many, many art forms. And so it's impossible, as densely packed as our course is, and students are busy in our course, I can't make them an expert at everything. But what I can do is make sure that when you go to an audition, you're not experiencing something for the first time. So an example for that is this semester, before the pandemic, students were doing stage combat. Planned for a semester. It's going to come back next semester. But I can't make them in 12 weeks an expert in all aspects of stage combat, but I can at least give them some experience in using weaponry and hand combat and, all that sort of stuff, so that they're not walking into an audition, never have experiencing those things. Ballroom dance, hip hop, accents and dialects, whatever. Our course really does its very best to make sure that students, aside with the core things in the course, ballet, tap, jazz, acting, voice, song rep, those core ingredients, but you also get to experience all this range of other things that you could be asked to do in the industry.
Sure. George, that's all we have time for, but thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure everyone has thoroughly enjoyed that. There are many questions I wasn't able to ask, but from all of us at AMEB and from all of us watching, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
We're here to help at AMEB. There are lots of resources for teachers, students and parents, including how to access our free online theory of music courses available on our website. Next week on Break the Isolation, Tax for Teachers with Richard Thomas, a chartered accountant at Jeffrey Thomas and Partners, who'll be answering questions about navigating tax time as a music teacher. You can ask your questions via our website. Thanks again to George for joining us, and thank you very much.